Welcome to the Edges of Lean. I'm Bella Engelbach, and in this podcast we explore the human and creative side of lean thinking, unusual places where lean thinking is practiced. We meet people who are practicing continuous improvement in many different flavors and styles. So come along with me on a journey to the edges of lean.
Episode 59, Continuous Improvement and Remote Work Success with Marianne Snow. Remote work, it's here to stay, and that impacts everything. For many, remote work is still something kind of new, but for Marianne Snow, who is the author of the soon-to-be-released Remote Work Handbook, remote work has been her area of expertise for more than 20 years. That's how long she has been leading remote teams and continuously improving how to operationalize remote work. Marianne is the CEO and founder of Sophaya and the Remote Nation Institute. Marianne Snow, welcome to the Edges of Lean.
It's really, really nice to be with you today.
Hey, Marianne, tell us about yourself. What is it that you're doing?
So, Bella, I live in the world of remote and distributed teams. And what I mean by that is my company, Sophaya, and our project, the Remote Nation Institute, we help organizations operationalize in remote work and distributed team situations. And in our institute, we teach leadership skills, how to run a remote and distributed team effectively, productively, and positively.
And that's very interesting to people who are working in lean and continuous improvement, because one of the first things that we're taught in lean especially is the importance of going to the gemba, which means going to the actual place where work is happening. And as we all know, since the pandemic, and certainly in my life before that, when I was part of distributed teams, like global distributed teams, that was a challenge, right? You cannot go and see the work happening. So a lot of what we think and believe about how we, as managers, as leaders, help our employees become better at seeing and solving problems and coaching them, all the stuff that we learned about how to do that got taken away from us. And I don't think that we've solved all the problems there. So how did you get into this?
Well, just like you, Bella, I got into this because I was working in situations where I was inside companies actually implementing process improvement solutions, change management solutions in large distributed organizations. And it started out regionally and then moved to nationally. Then it went to international. And in that time period, just like you said, sometimes it just wasn't cost effective, wasn't time effective, wasn't in the budget to physically be present. And when you're not on site and you're working on a daily basis with folks who might be in not only a different location, it might be a different time zone, it could be a different hemisphere. I worked with people in different hemispheres. You're dealing with a lot of practical and just pragmatic. You have to be pragmatic, because the plain fact is that in a global economy, you can be working with a highly dispersed team, but also a highly very unique and culturally diverse team, right? For lots of different reasons, whether it's a discipline or an actual geography or language issues or whatever. And so I got into the work because I had to operationalize solutions, very often change management solutions that were associated with process improvement of whatever type the organizations I was working with, whatever system that they were working with, lean, different iterations of lean. And in that work, to your point, it became very obvious to me that there were approaches you can use, techniques that you can use to build relationships, to incent people to be cooperative and establish trust, and to moderate in these forums, to educate in these forums, to incent in these forums, to operationalize in these forums, but you couldn't do it with line of sight techniques, right? You couldn't do it with old style, we're in the same room, let's whiteboard this out. Now we are in the same room through whatever video platform you're working with. And now we're doing whiteboard techniques differently. We're moderating meetings differently, but you can do it effectively.
And so when you started to do this, how did you start? What were some of the things that you experimented with?
So I have an incredibly non-linear career path, right?
Yeah. Oh, great. I love that.
So I started my career as a liberal arts major. And the beautiful part of being a liberal arts major is critical thinking, right? Having to really analyze and fundamentally look at things from multiple perspectives. And that was a really critical skill. But the other critical skill I learned was writing and communications, being able to express myself in lots of different ways. And that was really fundamental, I think. And then I got involved with service businesses that were expanding. And quite frankly, I started my career saying yes. And so when somebody said, this project is a mess, we need somebody who's willing to kind of go in and figure it out, I would say yes. And then it became send Marianne. And then it became, you should own this. And then it became me teaching people based on trial and error or what worked in a particular situation, continuing my education and what did I learn during that process. So it was very ad hoc at the beginning, and the technology was not good. It
was horrible. Technology was horrible. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the only video option when I first started was Skype. It was 1-to-1, and it wasn't going to be a group meeting. Conference calls were a disaster. And even before that, quite frankly, I remember having to distribute messages for different types of pilots and different types of rollouts via videotape. That was a physical videotape. Maybe it was on VHS or maybe it was on CD-ROM. And then we were sending it. We were physically sending it through the mail. So one-to-many techniques have certainly evolved. And I feel like a kid in a candy store now because there are just so many options that didn't exist before.
So yeah, so I love that, and that's such an amazing career path, Marianne. And one of the things that I think that we sometimes see, especially in those disciplines, those improvement disciplines that come out of engineering, is it's hard to switch over to, well, let's think like a liberal arts major. That's the key, right? Is to look at things from multiple perspectives and being willing to try and experiment, and that's how we learn to do things, to learn to get better. And boy, I remember those days. Oh
my God.
WebEx. We used WebEx for a while in the company I was in, which supposedly we could see each other, but nobody ever turned their camera on. I mean, literally had people who covered their camera with a little piece of black tape, right? So that they couldn't be turned on. For whatever reason, they were afraid of their camera being hacked. I don't know what they thought they were going to do in front of their camera. Whatever reason. And then you just knew people were multitasking, right? Because they were so busy and so swamped. Yep. So one of the things that is has changed a lot, obviously, is we have this improved technology, improved video technology. We've got some really nice whiteboard technology out there that people are experimenting and doing great stuff with. And so the technology has advanced a lot. But what are the skills that we need to really succeed? Because it's not just, are you very good at mural, or can you can you sort of pass your image on Zoom so that you feel comfortable looking at yourself? What else do we need?
Yeah, and I think now we're talking about fundamentals related to operationalizing change, right? Because lean clearly has value in the sense that it's going to give you a formulaic framework, a sort of fundamental framework for evaluating a workflow or a process or a dynamic, and then identifying some sort of opportunities that exist to be able to improve productivity, right? And gain some positive outcome that will be helpful to the business or the organization. But on a fundamental level, Bella, we're dealing with people, because you can come up with the best plan in the world, and if you can't actually implement it and operationalize it successfully in the human circumstance, then this is very often where any process or any change management effort fails, because people are always the hardest part, right? They're the messy part. They're the messy bits. They're the tough part. And so, some of the things that have to happen for anybody who's going to be working in a change situation is, if you're doing lean, coming up with a solution in some ways is the easiest bit, because operationalizing the solution so that it can survive and actually reach its potential, that's the moment where the rubber meets the road, right? That's the moment where you actually get people who have real skills. And so one of this is understanding human dynamics, studying change management, thinking about I think negotiation, influence without authority, being able to moderate discussions in very dynamic circumstances, really kind of think about things in a methodical, deliberate, and mindful way, because these are hard situations where people are emotional, where they're assessing things based on, that change is, am I winning or losing in this change? How is it going to impact me? It's not going to work. We've tried it before. We've all heard it, right?
Yeah,
so those are the types of things.
Right. And I would just add, from my perspective from lean, we know that simply finding a solution, as we prefer to say, a countermeasure, which is the thing that we're going to try, see if we can set a new standard with, in a small organization, in a small group, the group can come up with that themselves, and then the change, they can own that change, they feel better about that change. But when you're trying to get to, how does this version of this countermeasure, how does this apply, and can we take that across a broader organization, into different cultures, different plants, you can't always get the involvement from everybody who would like to be involved, right? At some point, there are going to be changes that are going to happen that not everybody can be involved in creating, and not everybody's ideas are going to be involved in at least the initial implementation of it, right? And that's when people come and they say, well, these people from corporate, or whatever it is, they're imposing something on me, and I didn't get a chance to have input to it. I hate it. You changed my job, you changed my role. And lean, because we want continuous improvement, it's not about slamming that thing in there and just walking away from it. But even if we're not doing that, we're all going to have these
have these feelings. I just wanted to, put a little bit of framing around that. So, it's not just about taking something and you all got to do it, but it's taking something with the understanding that we're probably not all going to have the opportunity to be involved in creating that initial change. Right.
Yeah, and I would also, I think that will bring it even one step further, because even in small organizations, in small groups, there, how do you democratize that change in terms of feeling, getting people to feel empowered? Because even in a small organization, there will be resistance. You're never going to get 100%. You're never going to get 100% conversion. And, how do you manage that? And how do you think about that and show compassion, but still be able to move forward? And then when it gets into more complicated businesses, and my last projects inside of organizations, spanned global entities, 32 countries, 28,000 folks, 11 lines of business, highly regulated environments, lots of variables, lots of factors. And so you're taking those learnings from those relatively small group activities, and then really kind of thinking about magnifying all the variables that could be magnified in that circumstance.
Right.
And really tricky business, right?
And you don't necessarily have the time, the bandwidth to understand and analyze all those variables, right? So and people are not going to necessarily tell you. In fact, they probably won't tell you until it's too late. And that's compounded by doing this in a remote distributed environment, right? So if I'm feeling like I need to say something, but I have to say it in a Zoom meeting, and it's 10 o'clock at night in my time zone, and I'm not 100% sure what you're saying because I don't really understand your language all that well. I'm not going to tell you what the big thing is that's going to make it hard for me to jump over to that change. So if you're the person leading this, if you're the person facilitating this, what is your responsibility then how do you start to bridge that gap?
And I think, part of this is understanding that in distributed teams, and I think you have to do this even in person, but particularly in distributed teams, is what's the pre-work that has to happen? What's the due diligence that has to happen? What kind of pre-meetings do you have to have? What kind of organizational assessment activities do you have to engage in? So you're not just looking at work process, but you're actually looking at organizational structure, and you're not just looking at workflow, but you're actually looking at personalities and tenure and team culture, and you're not actually there has to be a listening tour, right? But listening tours are going to happen a little bit differently, because you're only in the best of circumstance, you're only going to get a particular perspective. I think the advantage, if you've been doing this a long time, is that there are some universal truths. People find it hard to accommodate change, and
that's a truth.
Universal truth. So if we start with that baseline, not because people are bad, not because people are necessarily obstructive, but they look at it differently. So understanding the psychology and the dynamics associated with those things, and doing your due diligence up front, and then creating an operating structure that will allow people to at least be able to understand what's expected of them, even if they don't like it, right? And now you can create an operating structure that is predictable and consistent, so that you can tell people ahead of time, you can talk to folks, you can note their reactions, you can solicit convertibles, folks who will find opportunity in that change, who get excited about it. And now you start to build a coalition, right? And you think about it in terms of, the different change management frameworks that can be utilized, but you're going to have to do it in a distributed team. So there's got to be a lot of listening. There's got to be a lot of follow-up. You have to be much more cued into your meeting stuff, creating a structure that's consistent and deliberate and mindful. And then you got to stay attuned. You're going to have to do follow-up in a different way. You can't assume that people are going to do follow-up, because they're just going to say, yup, yup, yup. And the day of the go live, you're going to find out the hard way that nobody lifted a finger. So you're going to have to create accountability structures that are going to have different types of indicators that allow you to be able to do your due diligence throughout the process.
And again, to do that in a way where you don't necessarily have that opportunity just to wander around, sit down with somebody and say, hey, how it's going? How's it going? Did you try this yesterday? Did it work the way you thought it would?
Yes.
And then I would think also, in doing this, there's this sort of tendency of some leaders to, I hate to say this, but to kind of get bored, right? So in their mind, we made it to the go live, and you made me do all this pre-work, and I didn't really necessarily want to do all this pre-work, made it to the go live, and now we're done, right? It's good. I want to move on to the next thing. But you haven't actually accomplished the change if you're not reinforcing the change, right? If you have to make sure that your reinforcement is built in, and that there's encouragement to continue, and that you're continuing to learn. And yet business kind of pulls us forward to what's the next thing, and can we move on to the next thing? So there's conversation there, Marianne, isn't there, also with leaders, with sponsors, about the importance of staying the course. And when you thought the project was done, it's not, I hate the term people say, well, okay, now it's going to be business as usual, right? We're done with the project. Now it's business as usual. So we sort of drop it right at the point where we should be pushing it forward, and doing all of this in a remote, distributed way. So what are some of the things that you might do?
Operationally, I just had the conversation with a client the other day, because we're laying out, and one of the things that I'm saying to them is operationalizing the change means that you have to look at the full cycle, the assessment piece, the planning piece, the rollout piece, the go live piece, because they're all distinct, right? And then once we have the go live, who's going to own this operationally from a budget perspective? How are you going to maintain this? How are you going to sustain it long term? And how are we going to get those stakeholders involved early? And then what do we have to do to support those people? And it kind of depends, right? Because I remember being involved with one rollout where we were rolling out a major general ledger system that had to be tied into a global fiscal cycle. So that turnover and the support for that turnover took 18 months. And it took 18 months because we had to go through every aspects of the fiscal calendar. And that was a big education process for the folks who were owning that stuff. So I think that's I have a book that's coming out in September about operationalizing change and distributed stuff. And I spent a whole chapter talking about don't mess up at the handoff, because this is where it really lives and breathes, because your team, supposedly, if you've done your job right, is, they're already converted to the change. They're already feeling the excitement. They understand what the goals are, but getting it to the owner, the operational owner, putting it in their hands and assisting them to the point where now it just becomes, this is the way we do business. That's where a lot of stuff falls down. And if you're going to do this in a distributed environment, then appreciate those frameworks. Again, you need a different set of accountability, a different set of accountability metrics. You need an operating structure where trust has been established, and
it's already established. You
Yeah.
can't wait to establish it afterwards.
Yeah. And then also, what are your success measures, right? What are your success measures, and how have you inserted those success measures into things like executive leader reports and dashboard frameworks and things like that, so that now you're actually inserting it at the executive decision level, but also how are you inserting it into job descriptions? How are you inserting it into compensation cycles, into how people get promoted, into all of the elements of the organization, so that it is now embedded in a meaningful way?
And I think that is something that is easy to overlook, right? Because if you think about, well, who owns the compensation system? Well, maybe it's finance and HR, right? So maybe finance and HR aren't involved in this particular project, right? But that system is really the thing that is pulling on a lot of people's motivation and engagement. Now, money's not the only thing, right? So it's also, what do I get the pat on the back for from my boss? What are the things that I need to understand are the things that are not acceptable, that we need to figure out another way to do. And a lot of that is intrinsic to how managers manage. But these bigger systems can get these sort of, the things that drive compensation, reward, promotion can get very disconnected from the change that's happening in the organization.
Yeah. Well, here's how I approached it. When I approach it, and I actually approach it as an internal person. And I've also used this technique with clients. I have a client who's a national insurance company, and they obviously, as a result of not only some changes in some of their market where they're consolidating offices and making changes to their internal structure, they're also experimenting with continuing flexible work options going forward, right? Well, one of the things that we talked about from day one is something that I did as an internal person, which was I formed executive steering committees with all of the key discipline stakeholders. So there was a point in time where I was working in international finance, and to my previous point, 11 lines of business, highly regulated, tens of thousands, right? Cast of tens of thousands. And if you're going to implement a change and you're going to do it, the head of HR was on the steering committee. The head of risk was on the steering committee. The head of legal was on the steering committee. Operations, the individual operations heads were there. The people from technology were there. IT was there. So you're getting the voices in the room that are key to particular disciplines that are underpinning any major change in an organization today. In the national insurance company, same thing. It's like, if you don't have the operators there, then they're going to tell you that remote work isn't possible. If HR isn't there, then, how do you add it to the hiring process, to the compensation process, to bonus structures, to job descriptions, to competency models? If IT's not there, how do you get the webcam? To people? How do you change conference rooms and rewire them so that you can do in-person virtual or hybrid options for meetings. So it's like, and then how do you keep the place safe? And how do you maintain that from a budget perspective? So finance was there. And so think about that. People have to think about some of these changes very holistically, and we're not necessarily built for that, right? If you're running a PMO office, then you've got a full portfolio, a slate of projects. You are the person who is looking at things from a limited resource point of view, from a how many things can we do at once, all of that sort of stuff. And you have to think very holistically, because you have to look at your 12-month calendar and say what's possible at each position in the year, given everything that is out in the world. Well, if you're doing this in distributed teams, you better be this strategic. You better be this global. You better be that thoughtful, because if you're not, then you're not going to be able to move something forward, because you're not going to be able to create the accountability structure that can stick.
And when you're dealing with an international company too, you're also dealing with different finance and different HR systems, right? I think that's the other thing that makes this even harder. So you, among other things, so just decisions about we're going to create this new position, or we don't need these positions anymore, which in one country might be easy to do, and another country may require months and months of preparation and notices, and very different perspective from so that kind of leads into sort of another issue with doing this, and something that I found when I was working in a big multinational on these types of teams, and that it could feel like you end up sort of with these back to back meetings. You're trying to cover all the time zones. You're trying to get to everybody. And human beings don't function well under those circumstances, right? Your brain gets tired, your eyes get tired. You can't maintain attention under those circumstances. So is there an answer there? How do we do this well, at the same time not destroy ourselves as human beings, have ourselves glued to the office chair and our eyes glued to the screen all day?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And I think part of it is really reimagining what communication is and what it looks like in this this distributed environment. And the irony, Bella, people were working in distributed environments well before COVID. So you and I have been dealing with some of these things from a practical point of view for years, but nobody ever gave it a vocabulary word, right? It wasn't named, right? But we were trying to figure it out. And so one of the things I would say to you is, first of all, you got to become a multi-channel communicating ninja, right? And that means you really got to look at all of the options that are available to you. How are you going to distribute a message? And if you're going to do any sort of a lean implementation, just like any change implementation, there better be a communication strategy, and you better think about it from a multi-channel perspective. When do you need to be in person? Because I'm not saying that in person doesn't have value, but I'm just saying it's not always practical or time effective or cost effective. If I'm working with China and I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, then I can't get on a plane every time I have to have a meeting. It's just not possible, right? Same thing with Australia, same thing. And, my teams were that dispersed. So it's like, okay, so what's available to me? When do I have a phone call? When do I have a video meeting? When do I have face-to-face meetings? When do I have group meetings versus one-on-ones? When do I do a pre-recorded video and send out a pre-recorded video? Because there are time periods, where it might make sense for me to record something send it off to someone while they're sleeping, give them a break, and then we have a follow-up. Sometimes I'm going to do handwritten notes and actually send it in the mail, send
And
somebody.
and those, I bet, are treasures, right? That when people get those handwritten notes, that's their favorite thing to get.
Right. And I think, so part of this is appreciating that, some people are more visual, some people are auditory, some people, appreciate having a written communication in advance so that they can consider the matter if they have to respond to me in a language other than their primary language. And so look at the dynamics of the team and what you're trying to accomplish from an operational outcome perspective, and from a team building perspective, and from just a trust building perspective. And you got to think holistically. The other thing I'm saying to people is keep your meetings short. We keep meetings between 15 and 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Because we know that anything more than that, you're losing people. And then, we still have clients who say, we want to do something, we want an event, we want a retreat, we want, 2 hours, 3 hours. I'm like going, okay, we're going to chunk it. We're going to, we're going to have 45 minutes, and then we're going to change up the activities. We're going to have small group discussions. We're again going to push the envelope on the technology, because can we do breakouts? Can we do discussions differently? Can we have different presenters? How are we going to structure that time so that we're chunking it in a way so that people are seeing the variety, but they're also being asked to participate? We have standard meeting protocols. You come in, we send them to you in advance. You come in, you're on camera. Yeah, we put your full name there. I'm going to call you by name, Bella. I'm going to, ask your opinion, but I'm going to tell you this in advance. And, how do you structure things so that people are prepared? When they're participating, we keep them moving, even though they're not moving. And we do good follow-up, and we can still record so that if somebody wasn't able, they can do the catch-up if they so choose, right?
And if it's only a 15-minute meeting, it's okay. You'll take the time to watch that. And if I have to sit and watch an hour meeting, Marianne, right, to catch the 5 minutes of info that's pertinent to me, I might not do that.
Right. And I think what's really important is you're looking at things holistically, and you're saying, how am I going to get the best level of engagement out of the particular forum and the structure of how I'm going to connect with people, right? What are my objectives? Just like with anything, what do I want for an outcome? How do I work backwards from there? What's technically possible? What have these people been exposed to before? What's the culture? What do they need to know? And think about it logistically and holistically and very deliberately.
And then would you say that, and this is, really, what coming from a lean perspective, you would say, once you've set that intention and you've created essentially that experiment with this group of people, you haven't really finished it until you sat back and say, okay, what actually happened? Did I achieve what I intended to achieve? And what do I learn from that? The gap between what happened and what actually happened, that's what's going to make the next one better, right? So treating all of this as more learning cycles, right? And not as just something that we're sure about, and then we move on whether or not it worked.
Yeah, and that's actually the watchword for my career and my life. It's like, what did I learn from that, and how do I make sure that never happens again, or how do I do more of this so that does happen again? Right.
This happened. How did that happen? I want to make sure I can do that one again. Because it wasn't just luck. Something made that happen. Wow. Wow. So, Marianne, tell us a little bit more about your book.
So the book is called The Remote Work Handbook, and it's about operationalizing change and remote work initiatives in distributed and remote teams. And I'm a business person at heart, and also I'm an implementer. So I'm the person who has spent my career having to go in at the intersect between how do I identify the problem, but how do we operationalize it? And so I'm taking 20 years of operationalizing problems and talking about all the learning. So everything that we've chatted about, Bella, how does one approach? How do you assess? How do you create that plan? Who are the stakeholders involved? How are you going to, at every stage of the way, think about things very deliberately and consciously with outcome driven, deliberate, conscious, mindful planning so that you get a better result, but also you have an opportunity to assess things along the way and be able to have measurability and be able to answer the question, was this successful or wasn't this successful? Why did we do it this way? That there are the whys behind all of the steps that we're asking you to take, that there's actually a methodology there.
That sounds great. That sounds like a very, very helpful book for anyone who's involved in any type of change, because most change now is going to be in some kind of a distributed environment whether you have people who are continuing to work remotely, if you're fully working remotely, if you're working with contractors, you're not going to have everybody on site anymore. I mean, that's just not the way the world is going forward. So that sounds like an extremely useful book.
Yeah, we're really trying to take a lot of practical knowledge that has been learned the hard way, in living laboratories. So it's not theoretical. It's not an academic approach. It is an honest, really step-by-step guide for how do you actually get from concept to, geez, this is just the way we do business now, and what are the specific steps that you can take along the way.
That's great. That's great. So, Marianne, how can people find you?
People can find me through LinkedIn if they want to talk to me personally. Marianne Snow, it's Marianne. I know you're putting this in the show notes, and people are more than welcome to reach out to me and talk to me that way. We also have two websites, Sophaya, Sophaya, which, by the way, is the phonetic spelling for the word Sophia, which is the Greek word for wisdom, problem solvers.
Wisdom, yes.
Yeah, and so it was all about good problem solving. And the Remote Nation Institute is also a great way to connect with us, and through any of those means.
That's great. That's great. Marianne Snow, what would be your one piece of advice for a young person starting out now?
The one piece that I would say to anybody is don't be afraid to say yes and to try stuff. And I know that, there are a lot of young folks coming in, and very often when you're young in your career, you can feel a little intimidated by situations that you've never done before. But the only way to learn is to put your hand up and to make yourself available to those circumstances. So taking a risk and then being ready to not be perfect, because you won't be perfect, and admit your mistakes, learn from your mistakes. Just don't keep doing the same thing, same mistake over again. Do it once, learn from it, Make a new one next time.
Make a new mistake. And that is great advice. I know sometimes people coming out of school, especially, have been really feel that they have to be perfect all the time and striving for the grades. But once you are in the work environment, it's not about grades anymore. It's about it, and it should have been in school. It should have been all about learning. Out of school, it is really all about the learning. So fantastic advice. Marianne Snow, thank you so much for traveling with me to the edges of lean.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Bella. I have a big philosophy, which is, everyone that I meet is just a friend I haven't met yet. So I'm looking forward to staying in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks.
This is Bella Engelbach, and I'd like to thank Marianne Snow for being my guest on the Edges of Lean. What have you learned about remote work? What are your challenges and successes with remote work? We'd love to hear from you. Find Marianne at remotenationworks.org or on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn or at leanforhumans.com, or comment wherever you watch or listen. Don't forget to subscribe and tell a friend about the Edges of Lean. Please join me in exploring more of the Edges of Lean. There's a lot to learn. And check out my friends in the Lean Communicators community at leancommunicators.com. You'll find more podcasts and videos with lots of great new content every week. The Edges of Lean is written and produced by Bella Engelbach with support from Podcast Inc. This is a Lean for Humans production.